All right, cool. Yeah, we'll get started then. So thank you everyone for joining. If you're here to learn about asset-based community development, you're in the right place. And I was telling someone about this webinar and they thought I said acid-based community development. I was like, that sounds interesting also. Uh, so let's see, how do you, there we go. Okay. So I'll introduce myself. My name's Kelly Hickler. I am one of the co-chairs of the APA Community Engagement Interest Group, and we are the ones hosting this webinar today. I'm also the founder of Cinovation Studio. That's my consulting firm. I focus on innovative civic education and engagement. Also on the call is my co-chair, Chris Holler. Hey, Chris, who is the founder of Conveyo, which is the engagement platform for plans and policies, and is powering our webinar today. So thank you, Chris, for that. And if you are not a member of our interest group, we would love to have you join us. You do not have to be a member of APA. It's free to join. It's open to everyone. You can go to our website here and join us. You'll automatically get our newsletter, our monthly newsletter through Substack. So you can learn about more events like this one. And we have some content on our YouTube channel. This is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So check that out. And we are a community powered interest group. So we rely on the content or our members to provide content. So please, if you have stories, resources, case studies, best practices to share about community engagement, please share them with us. If you have ideas for future webinars, please drop us a line at hello@apacommunityengagement.org and we'll see if we can't get you on the schedule. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Megan and Eric, to teach us about asset-based community development. And I'll stop sharing my screen. So let me know if you have any trouble sharing yours.
Yeah, hey, hi everyone. It's truly a pleasure and a joy to be here with you. Kelly, Chris, thanks a lot for the invite, for hosting this. It's a really important concept. Yeah, I love that terminology, right? The community's the center of this, right? And that's really what's at the heart of the work that Megan and I do, is community-centered work, helping communities, center the work of the community as that's really kind of the key driver of change. So, Megan, I think you're gonna start sharing our slideshow. I just want to share a little bit kind of like our vision at CommunityWorks. So we are a nonprofit, national nonprofit. We've been around since 2008. We're kind of based out of Zeeland, Michigan, but you can see on the map where we worked just this past year, training, coaching, and also implementing in some communities, implementing some work on the ground, including Toledo in Ohio, a few communities in Michigan, Central Michigan, West Michigan, and then Florida as well. So, but what drives us, right? What keeps us motivated moving forward? And that's that we really have this vision of every neighborhood and every community, every city in the U.S. flourishing because people are engaged, right? There's that idea of community, right, Kelly? People are engaged where they live, are contributing toward its vibrancy, and co-creating a better future for all. Now, I'm the executive director for CommunityWorks. This is maybe a little bit abstract. I'm also an instructor, an educator, extension educator through Central State University here in Ohio. I was just out doing a family economics workshop last night in Lima. And we were talking about the idea of, assets and building assets, right? And there's different kinds of asset categories, like fixed, like your car, for example, or liquid assets, like your checking account. But there's also the idea in accounting of productive assets, right? So like you invest, for example, in education, that builds the capacity of you're being able to make revenue and income on into the future at a higher level, right? So there's productive assets as well. Sometimes those are harder to define, and I feel like that's really what where we're at, right? Is we're trying to help communities develop their productive assets. And in the most cases, that means starting with the social and human infrastructure so that you can unlock that sort of like latent capacity. But to do that, you have to really center the work of the community. Um, so really to help us out getting started, I think you've got an activity for us or a brain teaser or something to help us get us started and oriented to our topic today.
I do. Yeah. And really quick, just some orientation to where we're headed today. So there's going to be two parts to what we do. So the first part is going to be for an hour, in whatever time zone you end or in, we'll end on the hour. And that's really going to be the introduction to asset-based community development and specifically what is the role that planners can play in helping support this work in your community. There is a second part as well that'll be for half an hour after that. And that's really where we're going to dive into a specific tool to help discover the assets that individuals have. And so just so you know, that's kind of how we'll frame our time together today. Uh, Most of the interaction during this first hour is just going to be through the chat. So if you did not come expecting to turn your camera on, because I have been there, there's no expectation of that. We might have some time for Q&A at the end where you can, but we'll just have you put some things in the chat. And then for that last half hour, it will be really interactive in groups. And so to start off our time together today, in the chat, I want you to answer this question. How is community engagement like growing a vegetable garden? And there's not necessarily any right or wrong answer here. From your own perspective in your own community, how is community engagement like growing a vegetable garden? Oh, I love it. Y'all are quick. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and read off some of them, but feel free, jump on in and keep adding them in the chat. So we've got, it takes time and patience. It's a lot of work. You can't just set it and forget it. You have to nourish it continuously. Really like that wording, Emily. It takes time and hard work. It's dependent on the environment. You have to consistently show up with time and care. It takes time, but it reaps benefit. Consistent care and attention, a lot of different needs, planting a seed, but it's also a hope for the future. Constantly having to learn to do it better. Each vegetable has different needs for it to grow, intention to start things, stewarding it for a healthy endpoint, different strategies, consistent nurturing, science, and a balance of inputs and outputs. If you only focus on a single crop, you're setting yourself up for failure. Continuously cultivating it. Seasonal fluctuations, yes. Starting small. Dealing with vegetables and with weeds. Time, patience, intentional. Awesome. So it seems like there's a bit of themes in our responses, really about showing up consistently, but also understanding, right, what is the environment we're operating in, right? I know we're all calling in, some from different countries, a lot of us from different states, and we all have different environments that we're growing in. And the same is true with communities, right? No two communities are alike. And so when we're talking about engaging with folks, engaging with different groups, part of what we also wanted to address is our environment has really shifted, right? The work that we're doing, I mean, in the past 20 years, but even in the past 5 years, is rapidly changing. How communities are gathering together, how they're getting engaged in these processes, all of that. And so that's what we're really starting our time off with today, is talking about what have been some of those environmental changes that we're seeing in this work. And we're going to kick that off with something called the vital condition.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Megan. And gosh, I just love the comments that you all shared, just real wisdom coming through. Uh, so I wanted to just take a minute, kind of share something called the Veil Conditions Framework. This might be something you're familiar with if you're connected to great places like Robert Johnson Foundation or the Ripple Foundation or some of those places that help to bring people together and develop this. But basically, the idea is kind of like we have vital signs the doctors use to kind of like know, is the heartbeat going? Are you breathing right? Those are the key things that if those aren't working, then we know that something's wrong with the body. That something needs to happen. And so lots of work went into developing these to understand what are the things that are really vital conditions for a community that if it's failing in one of these in some of these areas, then the community as a whole is not going to be flourishing. And so that's things like humane housing. We're all struggling as community professionals, community development professionals. Like housing is a real struggle right now, and for many of us, education, lifelong learning, meaningful work, reliable transportation. We've got to have clean air, and that sort of thing. So a thriving natural world on the basic needs for health and safety. The thing that strikes us at CommunityWorks is in this model, they placed at the center, at the heart of this, is something called belonging and civic muscle. And to that, sometimes we use words like social cohesion and collective efficacy, or agency and belonging and trust. That's this kind of thing that sits in the middle, because again, if you unlock that or if you build that up, then it has a net positive effect and a ripple effect that it impacts all the other categories, because now you're engaging people and building toward that preferred future in those different categories, right? So now that the people in your community have become a productive asset with you, to use that example from before. So that's briefly it. So the question then for us always is, how do we help communities build belonging and civic muscle? And so one of the tools that we use, one of the big toolkits, is something called asset-based community development. We're going to go into that. Meg's going to help us really dive deep into that. But to set the stage, I'm going to go ahead and tell a story of a community that has built belonging and civic muscle. And so I want you to do this. In your mind's eye, we're going to go back about 20 years. It's the early 2000s. And it's a community, a small city in West Michigan called Holland. So Holland, within the municipal limits, 35,000, but, between Holland and Zeeland, the MSA is about 135,000 population. Within Holland, and you can base, kind of based on the name, there's a heavy Dutch influence. They have the Tulip Festival every year. It's thousands and thousands of people come to it. So there's a lot of great assets. And it has some neighborhoods. And one of those neighborhoods is called the Holland Heights neighborhood. Now this, the Holland Heights neighborhood, so Holland Heights is one of the lead characters here in this story. I'm going to tell this brief story. Tracy is also a key actor. I'm going to introduce also Wasana, one of the residents, and I'm also going to introduce Sergeant Weatherwax by the end of this. But as you first into this story, again, in the about 2005, 2006, you will see the Heights of Hope, or the Holland Heights, and then eventually it became known as Heights of Hope, and which has its own organizational infrastructure. But you see the neighborhood. It's a series of apartment complexes. They're fourplexes primarily, and this is the area at this point in time that has the highest number of calls to 911 to the police department of any point in the neighborhood. I mean, in the community, in the city. So you can imagine, because you've probably been in that kind of environment as well yourself, right? So it's a little bit feels a little bit run down, and those kinds of things. into that story, the story of the neighborhood, we meet Tracy. So Tracy comes as an AmeriCorps volunteer, AmeriCorps member, and she's gotten trained on something called asset-based community development, which is, our preferred methodology that we go to. So she gets trained on that by Jay Grogan, who is coincidentally still making an impact, still on our board, even though he's retired. But gets trained on ABCD, and that from that training, she understands that the first move needs to be to listen. And she actually moves into the neighborhood and she starts to listen. She does that by putting up on the cul-de-sac. She puts up a basketball stand and invites the kids out and the parents out, and people. And as people are playing basketball, she's asking certain questions, magic wand questions, like, if this was if you could make any change, one change in the neighborhood, what would that be? And she keeps collecting those kinds of answers as we go along. Well, fast forward from that listening process, people started to rise up, become block connectors, and they started to take responsibility for the condition of their apartment complex and their street. And then a group forms where, on a regular basis, these block connectors are coming together, sharing what they're learning, and trying to express what the neighborhood wants moving forward. Well, as you fast forward, what they say is, well, we need a community center. And so then they do what? They rent one of the apartments and they call that their community center. Lo and behold, you experience the police coming out saying, well, I'm sorry, but it's not zoned for that. And so there's some give and take with City Hall and going out, advocating for it. Eventually things get a variance. And so now they have their first community center. So they have, again, they've lived through that. They're creating some of that civic muscle, right? Because civic muscle, like any muscle, you don't use it, it gets atrophied. You use it by working together, it builds. So then they say, well, what should we do at this center? Well, they start to create programming. And the first program they want to do is they wanted to create programming for the youth. And they still, to this day, if you go, you will enter the website, the Holland Heights website. Again, an organization directed and led by the neighborhood. You'll see programming for youth, and you can see at the top right, still lots of programming for youth, for families. You see some graduates from a program called Getting Ahead and Getting by World, who then came into the Circles community, and so they got allies and support in their life journey. Programming that happens around holidays, programming like block parties, and you see them gathering there at the top left. So over time, they really get good at programming, and then they say, well, but what about the infrastructure? They start to think about what's the infrastructure around us. Well, one thing is we use the public bus system the most of any neighborhood in the city, but we don't have a shelter. And so they go to the police, they go to Parks and Rec, they go to the different places, departments, they go to City Hall. Nobody has the money for it. So they start to do fundraising and then get some business interest. And they build their own bus shelter. Again, they're building their muscle, the ability to envision a preferred future and to work together to achieve that preferred future, right? And so now they got the bus stop, and then they say, well, what else do we want? Well, we want an actual center. So guess what? One of the fourplexes opens up for sale. They, as a neighborhood, make the purchase. Now they are owners of property in the neighborhood, and they rent out the upstairs to be able to fund some of the programming, and they turn the downstairs into their community center that they operate lots of things out of. And by the way, they recently during COVID, they keep building their muscle. They did this really hard thing. During COVID, they were losing some of the residents because the rent was going up. And so when the opportunity came, they bought their second fourplex. Again, you just see this ability, this capacity to create change happen. Well, the thing I wanted to kind of end with, right? Because this brings us up to kind of the current. So I want to introduce you briefly to Wasana, right? So Wasana is one of the residents who's been here through this entire time. And this is what she will tell you. If you go and visit her today, you go talk to her, and she will say this. She will tell you that when she first moved in, her big dream was to move out because this was a very transient environment back in the early 2000s. Her big dream was to move out. But now you couldn't pay her enough to leave. And the reason is this. The reason is this neighborhood, this community helped to raise our kids. And the kids, all of our kids graduated from high school. And for many of them, this was their first, they were the first one to finish high school and move into college of many of the families there. And it was the community raising it that made the difference. And in fact, she says, she'll tell you, I'm probably not gonna be able to move out of poverty, but guess what? This neighborhood came together and they broke that generational cycle because we had each other's back through this entire process. So I want to, if you want to advance to one more slide there, I want to conclude with Sergeant Weatherwax. And Sergeant Weatherwax is the community response, sergeant over the community response unit of the police department. The police department is really kind of a real strong advocate for this. Why? Because Sergeant Weatherwax started off as a police officer in that neighborhood. He knew it was the highest, call neighborhood. So what does he talk? How does he talk about it today? This is a direct quote. Seeing this philosophy at work, that is ABCD, asset-based community development. Seeing it firsthand, seeing the area move from this high crime, dingy neighborhood, his words, to what it is now, a bright spot in our community. This program works, is turning neighborhoods into communities. So if you want to advance forward one more, Megan, the thing I want to end with is, so the Highland Heights neighborhood is that neighborhood is circled there with the arrow pointing to it, kind of across the state route there. But now, over the past 20 years, as Highland Heights has become stronger, other neighborhoods have started down that same path, starting at different points in time. So now you have a total of 6 neighborhoods, and they're the ones that are shaded in there, all of whom have a connector who has some kind of, neighbors as a board, as a group, working together to create change and build a better future. You got community gardens, you got mural projects, you got all kinds of things happening that they are moving into and living into. Catalyzing all this is the city of Holland, who actually they've got an official, you can go to the website, they've got a blueprint for flourishing neighborhoods where they lay out all this, but they actually invest out of general funds, they invest a matching grant to support neighborhoods that want to start to operate in this way. And then through that, neighborhood's going to hire a connector, and then the connector starts this ABCD or asset-based community development process, listening, engaging, mobilizing, and then creating change. So that's the story I wanted to share with you as we move forward, just so you have kind of a picture of what this looks like. And then Megan's going to come in and give you some of the theory behind it and some of the theory that kind of undergirds all this. But I will say, as we move out, just so you know, the story's not going to end here. If you look at the middle of the city, you see a little big sort of triangle. That's Maplewood. Now, Maplewood is coming and has been coming to the monthly meetings of the connectors and the key residents that meet monthly because they're interested. So you've got this sort of flywheel happening, right? There's this forward momentum where more and more neighborhoods are starting to see the value in this, and they're starting to live into it. So you've got this kind of this gravitational force now, that's moving this story forward. So I hope you come back and talk to us in another 20 years, and you'll see the entire city shaded. But now, Megan, let me give it back to you to give us some of that theory and practice that underpins this story.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is right, exactly what Eric said. This is why we're such huge fans of asset-based community development, is because we've seen how residents can step into leadership and how they can really build community through this process. But I also know, right, where many of us are joining in either as planners, as leaders in different nonprofits, in churches, in different community organizations. And I'm assuming if you told your boss that instead of working across the community, you just wanted to work deeply with one neighborhood, that's probably not going to happen, right? We can't all be Tracy's. And some of us may even not even know where to start in finding those Tracy's in the neighborhoods. And so what we're going to do is really provide some background on what is asset-based community development as a whole, right? What does that framework look like? And then we're going to dive into, right, and we'll use the word planners. Um, but I think really we could talk about anyone coming from community or organizational leadership, right? Or you guys, what are some specific shifts that you can make to really implement this in your work and to support that bottom up trust building? And so, starting off with that general background of asset-based community development. So we'll call it ABCD for short. This is a framework that came out in the 1990s, published by two guys, John McKnight and Jody Preston. And what had happened is they actually traveled the country looking at different neighborhoods, because what they saw is some neighborhoods started to improve and then they went back to the way things were, while others continuously continued to get better. And so their question was, why? What's happening in these different communities to get those different results? And so they really figured out, right, what are the three shifts that these communities are making? And they called it asset-based community development. And so the top shift that we're looking at, and it's the water we swim in, right? This is the way that we are trained to make communities better, is by focusing on what's wrong, right? Looking at needs of our communities, the issues that they have. But what McKnight and Kretzmann saw was actually the communities that were able to sustain transformation didn't start there. It's not that they were blind to the issues of their community, but they started with what's strong, right? What were the gifts in our neighborhood? And they built off of that. And so that's really where they're talking about, right? The strength, the gifts, or the assets of our community. And by connecting those, you were able to create sustained transformation. And so that's the first shift, right? Instead of looking at what's wrong or the issues, we're looking at what's strong. All of this is also done in the context of neighborhoods, right? So it's looking at a very specific, defined geographic scope. It's not looking at connecting gifts across the city, but folks right next to each other. And so within asset-based community development, they identified 6 gifts. And we're going to give an overview. I'll say one of the great things that I get to do is we'll lead workshops with different local governments. My favorite is different neighborhood groups to actually map the assets of your community. So if you've got more questions from this webinar, you can't pay me enough to talk about this stuff. I mean, I'm sure you can, but like I love talking about this. So what are those 6 gifts? The first gift is individual. And these are the most underrated, but the most important. To Eric's story, right? Tracy, right? These individuals bring different skills, gifts, and knowledge to our community. And that's where we start. So in my neighborhood in Azalea Park in Orlando, Florida, which I think is the best neighborhood ever, we recently had a local nonprofit get a grant to plant some trees to restore our urban canopy, which was awesome. And they got the grant funding. They had done all this work. And when they started talking to neighbors about it, neighbors actually weren't excited. And it's not because neighbors didn't want beauty and nature in their community. What that organization didn't know is that the oak trees that they were wanting to put in were the same oak trees that back in 2004, when we had Hurricane Charlie, was destroying homes. And so because they didn't have that history, right, they had done all this great work, but it wasn't landing in the community because they didn't engage the gifts, the knowledge, the skills of individuals. And so that's the first and most important gift in any community. The second one I'll talk about briefly is association, which in ABCD, it's another term for groups, right? These could be formal groups like neighborhood associations or a Rotary Club. It could be Boys and Girl Scouts, or it could be informal groups like a group of women who go walk together every day, or people who take their kids to the playground at the same time every weekend, right? It might not be structured, but those associations are what allows people to talk and to discover the gifts and the needs in their community. So back to the example of Heights of Hope, right? It was through playing basketball that residents were really able to identify, how do we want to work together for our community? So they had a place to come together and they were able to build those relationships. The gift of institutions, this includes local government, the school system, businesses, houses of worship, right? So these are the formal structures in our community. And what they do is they can really provide gifts, including having space for people to meet in, being able to bring in funding and resources for the community, and being able to provide representation or leadership as well. The next one is physical world. This is the land and anything on it. So we've got quite a few, and I'm sure even, let's do this in the chat. If you have any community gardens that were built on abandoned plots or land, go ahead and put a 1. It's not that you helped start that, but if you've now got community gardens in your community, put a 1 in the chat. Right. Perfect. All right. We already got a ton of responses, right? Physical gifts, right? So a lot of people turned abandoned plots of land into gardens for the community to come together. We have a number of stories around even neighborhoods using discarded construction materials to build playgrounds for kids, to repair broken walls in their community, right? So even things that we wouldn't consider to be a gift, communities have used to improve their community. The next one, gift of the economy. This talks about local businesses. So one of the questions I ask a lot to different neighborhoods is, can you get everything you need for daily life in your neighborhood or nearby it, right? So do we have access to grocery stores, healthcare, schools, all of that? And that's really reflected as well in those vital conditions that Eric had brought up at the very beginning. However, when we're talking about economy, we are also talking about what we call the informal economy. And so this is exchanges between neighbors. I'm in Florida, born and raised, so that's the context I've got. But I know in each part of the country, right, we've all got our different natural disasters that we have to prepare for. In Florida, that's hurricanes. And so many of us know, right, when that happens, right, especially hurricanes, if you've got flooding, if you've got trees down or power lines down, you can't rely on people even a couple streets over. It has to be those on your block. So on my block, we know who has the chainsaw, right? Who has a backup refrigerator, right? That people can use if they need their medication stored, right? All of those things also count as the local informal economy. And then the last one we'll talk about, right? Culture or history. So this is something that every neighborhood, every community has, but we may not be aware of it. And so if your neighborhood has a culture of getting together, I had the opportunity, I used to live in a really great apartment complex downtown, which was awesome. But when the property manager was showing me around, pretty much said, we keep to ourselves. We're quiet, right? People don't really engage here. And that set the culture for how I lived there and how I engaged with my neighbors over those years. Fast forward, when I moved into my current neighborhood, the very first truckload of materials that I was moving into my house, my neighbor Bert next door came by. He's lived in that community his whole life, was born in the house behind him. And for him, that was normal, right? There's a culture of connection, of knowing each other. And so that's how, right, culture is shown in our different neighborhoods and is a gift. And so in all of those communities that McKnight and Kretzmann studied, these 6 gifts played some part. It may not have been all 6, but they were used to really increase the resilience and those vital conditions of these communities. And so there's 3 shifts, right? Once you identify those gifts, right, you're starting with the community. What do residents know? What can they do with what they've already got? You're moving from an issue-based lens to a real place-centered focus, right? Not looking at transportation or affordable housing across the region, but in this neighborhood, right? Because we all know that those are really tied together. One of my favorite stories from our friends, the Neighboring Movement in Wichita, Kansas, is they did this process of knocking on doors, getting to know neighbors. They met one man who couldn't get groceries because he had a car but no driver's license. One street over, there was a man who had a driver's license but no car. By connecting them, they were able to get rides to go to the grocery store together every week. And so that's transportation. That's also access to healthcare. That's community, right? When we take that place focus lens, we're impacting not 1, but 20 things in a community. And then lastly, right, what we talked about, not looking just at what's wrong, but starting with what's strong. And really quick, I'll just give a quick story of Michigan City, Indiana. And so the Economic Development Corporation has for the past several years held a neighborhood leadership academy where they bring residents in different wards together to come up with a plan. They map their gifts in each neighborhood. They figure out what they bring to the community, and then they combine those to improve their neighborhood. Last year, I was out with them, and one of the ideas that they had, because they know that there is an issue with gun violence and with drug dealing, is they can't necessarily stop that, but they can help youth from getting into that cycle. And so the idea that they had was to host midnight basketball. And so on Friday nights at midnight, they would rent out the basketball court and host games. And so this brought out a lot of youth, but they also brought caring adults from the community who were able to mentor and support them and play basketball with them. And so that's the shift, right? Exactly like the Heights of Hope story. This is resident driven. They're using their gifts and they're connecting and building relationships with one another. And so that's an overview of ABCD. Before we jump in specific to what is our role, I want to ask you another question for you to respond to in the chat. What would a meaningful, productive relationship with your community look like? Or what would be different? And so this isn't a question of like, we would have a 6-step framework that gets us perfect results, right? Like, what would it look like if you're in a community meeting? What does that meaningful, productive relationship look like? And so go ahead in the chat, just type some responses. What would you see? What would you hear? All right, we've got listening more than speaking, people showing up, being present, a space for young adult voices. It'd be easy to communicate, find a consensus for the common good. Deeper connections, more vulnerability with sharing community needs and challenges. People know each other's names. There's more trust. Oh, that one came up multiple times. Better outcomes, decentralized responsibilities. Instead of the planner having to set events and having independence, the community is setting up their own event. Absolutely. Open doors, a space that is inclusive of all voices. Multiple perspectives being heard, diverse groups showing up, conversation, speaking, trust. Awesome. Okay, I love these responses, and I would love to go to a community meeting like this, right? As a resident, not as a planner, right? This sounds amazing to have that kind of open conversation. It sounds like a lot of mutual respect and really getting back to that root of having trust in the community. And so what we're going to do now in the next 9 minutes, because we'll leave some time for Q&A. And I'll also add, if you've got any questions, go ahead and you can put them in the chat. and we'll keep track of them and make sure to add them to the queue for Q&A. But what we're going to do is dive into what are 3 shifts, and we want to get very practical, right? I love talking about ABCD, but at the end of the day, if there's not some concrete next steps for how to get started or how to take your next step, then it's a great conversation that's probably going to lead nowhere. So this is where we get, right, very, very simple of what can you do in your role to really support asset-based community development. All right, so the first one, and I am stealing this language from one of my friends, Raina Bradley, who's a planner with the city of Fort Wayne. She taught, and I think she's actually quoting someone else, so I apologize that I don't know the original source. So the idea of resident experts and expert residents. So all of us in this room are resident experts, right? We are bringing knowledge, we're bringing certifications, right? As planners, as community development leaders, as organizational leaders, we're resident experts. We've got knowledge, right? So there might be a problem with speeding in my neighborhood, but that doesn't mean that we as residents actually know what are the practices to help calm traffic. The resident experts do, right? They know the best practices and they've seen what works in communities. But this idea is, how do we also see those residents in the community as expert residents? So the story I gave, right, of planting trees, and that's not wanting oak trees because that's what fell in our community 20 years ago. That's an expertise that residents bring to their community, right? For the most part, residents are in their community a lot, right? Especially now, working from home, if they've got local businesses and local organizations that they're a part of, they're a part of that neighborhood life, right? They know what's happening. And so the shift here is, how do we move from not just informing or communicating with residents, is to seeing them as a partner, to co-creating what this could look like with them. And so the tool that we have that I'm sure some of you are familiar with is the IAP2 spectrum of public participation, which moves from informing to empowering in our work with residents. And so here, right, I know I've had some folks who have just printed this out and kept this up in their office as a reminder of how can we take steps to move more towards empowering our residents. And so that's one, right? In small ways, how can you engage residents as co-creators? But the other reality is that might not be every decision we can make, right? If we have a zoning law for a specific community that's about to go into effect, residents may not at the last minute actually be able to change or to be co-creators in that process. So when that option isn't available, when we're not able to collaborate, how are we communicating early and clearly about where we're at on this spectrum? And so having resident experts and expert residents working together, that's the first shift. The second shift is, how can we provide resources and storytelling towards asset-based community development? And so I know many of us here today are probably between like a rock and a hard place, where we've got programs, policies, procedures that we need to work in compliance with. But we've also got communities that don't fully fit, right, our clearly defined outcomes or policies. And so you're in between both, right, having to help navigate that relationship. And so while we may not be able to change those policies, what we can do is tell really good stories, right? Everyone in here has that power, is to really shift the narratives in our community through storytelling. And so this could look like not just celebrating really large neighborhood events that bring hundreds of people out, but also celebrating when a neighborhood holds an event with 10 people. And those 10 people actually get to talk and have really good, deep conversations because it was smaller. And so the resource that we have for you here is coming up in September. National Good Neighbor Day is a legit holiday signed into law by President Jimmy Carter. And so September 28th every year, there's now an entire movement of folks across the country who celebrate this in big and small ways. I wouldn't be surprised. Some of you here might even be in cities or communities like San Francisco, like Missouri, like Phoenix, Arizona, who actually have taken the next step and have turned this into a week or even a month of celebrations and really encouraging neighbors to connect and meet with each other. And I'll say they've got some great guides, some of which we've created, but for libraries, for churches, for HOAs, and for local government. So this is also a really easy tool to implement, right? This isn't something where you have to recreate the wheel. This is something you can directly connect your residents to help shift those narratives. All right, and then the last shift we've got is moving at the speed of trust. And so this one is probably the least tangible of those shifts, but it's probably the most important. So one of the biggest reasons why, I'll be honest, we even get called out to work with local governments or to work with resident groups is because there's a mistrust between residents and government. And that makes sense, right? If I had a 100-year relationship with anyone, I would probably have a bit of friction or trust there, right? It's bound to happen over time. And so that's one of the questions that I think we need to be honest about, right? Do we have trust in our community? If we do, or even if we don't, right? Who might be the organization or the residents that others trust? And even just having that background of how we have built, or maybe how we need to rebuild trust, will be really helpful as we move forward. And for this, right, some of this can happen top down. A lot of trust is built from the bottom up. So starting even at the block level within neighborhoods, there's a really great report, the Belonging Barometer, that is shown, right? If people feel an increase in belonging at that neighborhood level, it's actually likely to trickle up. They'll also feel more belonging with their family. They'll feel more belonging in the workplace, and they'll feel more belonging across the country. So some of the resources that we do have for you that you can get plugged in is actually next week. We're sitting down with our friends at Community Renewal International to start talking about their Block Connector program. So they're based in Shreveport, Louisiana, and have for years really been working to strengthen communities from the inside out. Part of that is actually training folks who are block connectors, who get to know the neighbors on their street and host gatherings to bring them together. And they've seen some really great impacts from this. And so if you're interested at all, if you want to hear that conversation, you can go to that link on the bottom, and we'll also send out a registration link after this call as well. The other one we've got, because this is an ongoing experiment, right? We are exploring and learning what is best in our communities. We don't have all the answers, but we want to connect folks to those who might even have some different insights than us. So one of the things that we launched last year is the Community Building Hub. And this is an online community full of local leaders who are strengthening neighborhoods and connecting neighbors. So if you're someone who's not just wanting to figure out what's maybe one or two ways, but you're really wanting access to practical resources, to other experienced leaders working in their communities, go ahead and check out the Community Building Hub. Right? We've had some great conversations, a lot of great learnings on here, and it's all a member-led community. So we're focusing on what people are seeing in the moment. All right, so those are the resources I've got for you. And so we'll go ahead. Kelly, would now be a good time to do some Q&A?
Yeah, sure. Let's go for it.
Perfect. Okay. If anyone's got a question, you can go ahead and put it either in the chat, or you can raise your hand. You can just come off mute, whatever works best for you.
Megan, I wonder, as people are thinking and dropping in the chat, I'd be curious, like, you gave the example of Michigan City. So how did those neighbors identify the common issue they cared the most about, and then what process did you find useful in helping the process what the next step we can take?
Yeah. Yes. So one of the things as well, I'm not sure that this is a specific ABCD principle, but that's really helpful, is not starting with the outcomes, but starting with the vision. So one of the questions we ask, and that a lot of ABCD practitioners ask, is if you had a magic wand and could make this the best community possible, what would be different? And so starting with that vision, there was one trailer park in Orlando, who at the time they actually had as well the highest level of crime in all of Orlando. They asked that vision of residents, and the thing that came out, the thing that people kept saying, was we would see kids playing on the front lawn. At that time, no kids lived in the neighborhood, but it was a vision, right? It was what they saw, the future that they wanted for their community. And so once they had that vision, they were able to do improvement projects. They were able to work together. Um, they were able to do some big things and some small things. But for 2 years, they went without any crime really being committed in that community. And at the end, there were kids playing on that front lawn. So I think starting with a vision can be really helpful. From there, there is a lot of coaching involved, right? So we're actually working with folks to identify the assets. Depending on the community, people might actually have a harder time if they don't feel like they've always had a voice in the process, or if trust needs to be built in that community. But typically from there, right, there's a few different activities we use, and we're happy to share to really get residents to figure out what is something that's simple, that's enjoyable, and that makes a difference in our community.
Awesome, thanks. And I
All right,
will
and I'll
note too, by starting with, at least in my experience, starting with that vision, and then people start to see how they could fit into that larger story. That's how you start to get contribution. That's also you start to catalyze people as not just clients, consumers, and passive residents, but as actors in the story. So thank you. Great insight. We do have some questions. Let's see. Gary Robbins says, I'm especially focused on connecting with neighbors around politics, maybe forming dim connectors. Do you work with this?
Yeah, so most of our connectors do not have any political affiliation. Gary, I'm assuming Dem stands for Democrat. If I'm wrong in that, feel free to jump in with a comment. Um, yeah, but they are all specifically focused at the neighborhood level. So one of the things I'll say as well, um, one of the big questions we get even from residents is what happens when politics comes up. Because the reality is, if you and your neighbor get into an argument, you're probably not going to sell your home just to avoid conflict. And I'll say, right, from the evidence we've got, and especially from some recent reports, collaborating locally to do things like creating a community garden, doing a cleanup, cleaning brush to prevent forest fires, actually decreases political polarization more than conversations around our differences. And so I'll say to that as well, right? We're also seeing a really tangible input there as well. All right, and I'll read, I see Emily's got a question too. How do you navigate those that are stakeholders, maybe business owners or out of the area owners that have a vision that differs than those actually living there? Eric, what would you say?
Mm,
Oh, and I think viewing communities as investment opportunities versus the places we live.
yeah, so I guess Yeah, I don't know. Others, anyone, feel free to chime in. You may have some great experience with this. Yeah, so um, maybe I'll give like a thought here. I'm not, and this may not specifically touch on this, so please feel free to jump in here, Emily, and okay. But something that we see happen sometimes, right, is first we think it's powerful when a neighborhood is connected, when there's that connectivity happening, belonging, and some level of, yeah, this is the preferred future that we want, and some level of naming that. It's just powerful, because then what you can do is, because according to some of the study research that Kritzman and Knight did, was 80% of what you want to achieve, you can achieve with, ultimately, you can make at least those first steps toward what you want to achieve with just the resources that you have as a neighborhood. Another 10%, you're going to need like outside experts, right? Those resident experts to support you as resident, as experts, um, along the neighborhood. But then you do need some outside resources and outside investments for that last, 10% to get you to that full achievement, right? So I think, at least for me, the key is the development that happens, if it's going to be durable and last. The best thing is if you own that vision, preferred future first, and then you use those external resources toward your, as a neighborhood, meaning that vision. Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I can add in, I'm very protective of the process, getting started in a neighborhood, really around just working with residents at the beginning. And so when we're talking about creating vision and even decision making, really wanting folks there who are residents in the community, even things like um, having elected officials or people like even having local pastors or business leaders, you can see, right, the conversation, which I've been at tables, right, where the conversation's gone in a very different direction because that elected official just had an idea that they were sharing, and residents completely changed. And so that's, I think, something very practical is start with residents and really build up that muscle first before engaging business leaders. And then really quick, I'm going to answer Maggie's question. And then Gary, I see you're here, so we can chat more. But Maggie, to your question about what does it look like to become an ABCD practitioner in a real applied sense? So there is no professional certification per se, because McKnight and Kretzman really wanted this to stay rooted in the community context. There is the ABCD Institute. You can look them up. They do offer virtual trainings on asset-based community development that you can attend as well. And so that provides some background as well. There's other institutions. So CommunityWorks will actually train people to be ABCD coaches in communities, as well as that neighborhood connector like Tracy was. So if you're looking to start that model, we can provide that training and certification there. I believe Tamarack Institute as well. So there's a few different options. And what I will do, I will go ahead, because I know we're at the hour. I'll drop my email in the chat. If you have any other questions or any follow-up questions, feel free. Like I said, I love talking about this. So just reach out to me and I'm happy to chat further.
Megan, I know
All right.
we're
And we are going
wrapping up, but if you want to stick around, we did budget 90 minutes that we would be around, because we do want to go over some practical, like we want you to take away something that you can take and use, implement. So I know James, for example, has another question. I don't know, James, if you have the time, you're welcome to stick around. We can get to these remainder questions in the next half hour. Kelly, any instruction for us here at this point, before anything we need to know before we move into the next segment?
No, so I'll just reiterate for everyone that the official webinar portion is over and we're moving into the Q&A. And I think you guys had some more interactive things for everyone to try. So, if anyone's not able to stay on and you need to go about your workday, no hurt feelings, do what you need to do. This is being recorded, so you can watch the rest of it later. If you have the time, we'd love to have everyone stay on. We can continue to answer everyone's questions, and then we can do some interactive practice with the ABCD.
Great. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah.
Megan, what do you think? Should we go ahead and um, look at the
Yeah.
question from James, and then Gary, again, you came online, so I'll give you some space too, and then we can go into the activity.
Yeah, Gary, why don't you, if you want to kick us off a bit with your question, diving a bit deeper into that, then we'll go to James and we'll do maybe 5 more minutes so that we can really dive into the activity. Heads up for this activity, again, super, super practical. We said that individuals are the most important gift, and they are, but how do you identify the gifts that they bring? So we are actually going to be in breakout rooms. You won't have to turn on your camera, but you will have to unmute yourself so you can have a conversation with folks. Of course, if you can turn your camera on, that would be even better. But just a heads up, we'll start that in about 5 minutes. So go ahead, Gary.
So thankful to hear you talk about ABCD. I've been at this now for 25 years since I retired from my corporate job. I had the privilege of meeting some good teachers about ABCD, namely John McKnight. He's been here in our community before he passed away on us. But in passing, I learned a lot about the principles of asset-based community development. I've been very involved with my own neighborhood here, community councils, we call them, organizing. And a couple of things I will say. One is, when I look at the city, in our city, we have Cincinnati, we have 52 neighborhoods, nice, neatly divided. They're all different. But they all experience a different culture, wouldn't be the word, makeup. They're all unique. One of the things that's missing, though, is our neighborhood doesn't have a good way of learning what other neighborhoods do or have or practice. And I feel sad that we're missing out on a huge. So if you could comment when we're done here about how we could facilitate cross-community, cross-neighborhood sharing, maybe best practices sort of thing. I brought some specialists in to kind of do that thing, and they dropped the ball on it for me. They got so excited about talking with people they didn't collect the information I was looking for. But I'm very much now involved in politics, caring a lot about making a difference in politics. I've got involvement with a good section of my city being responsible for. And I'm very aware that when connecting with people, that it's not the same as connecting with neighbors, as we talked about here, where you're just picking up from where they're at, because politics can be divisive. But I'm also interested in bringing some of the principles that we learn here about how to do organizing by bringing people together, connecting with, knocking on a door, finding out who they are, getting them connected, giving them chances to talk without letting it or creating opportunities for it to be divisive. Well, I've run into lots of good resources in that area. People doing that kind of work all around the country now. They're showing up, and I'm learning a lot from them. But how about we go back to that first question and get you talking on it? How do we? And I know there's some national organizations that do that, I'm plugged in, but I'm looking for a practice on how to make it specific, how I could learn from other neighborhoods and other neighborhoods could learn from each other. We have a central organization that handles some of the funding, but they don't get it. So they'll have a meeting and they'll talk about the funding proposals and all that, and then we all leave, and nobody knows anybody new after the meeting than when they went in. And that's so sad. We don't even have name tags.
Yeah.
We have an annual summit that brings in team leaders from all over the city. But we don't get it where it's a wonderful opportunity for us to meet each other instead of just going down and all of us meeting the city departments, which is a good thing. But I value meeting my peers most of all, and we don't do that. So go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah.
Looking
Yeah.
for some
Well,
wisdom
and
from
that,
you here.
we've got about 90 minutes of wisdom that I cannot fit into the next 3 minutes, but I did just drop a link to a webinar for you, Gary, in the chat, where we actually had the city of Orlando and their community connections workshop, as well as the Economic Development Corporation of Michigan City in their Neighborhood Leadership Academy, because we wanted to highlight how both of those helped residents step into leadership, but also provided that cross-neighborhood collaboration. So there's a ton of different models. I would encourage you to watch that. And then as well, if you reach out to me on my email, we also do free discovery calls. So I'm happy to talk to you for an hour of just like, what are the assets in your neighborhood, in your community, and what are some different opportunities there?
I'll take you up on that. Just a little bit of your wisdom would go a long way. Thank you.
Yeah, and
Thank
just
you.
to
Yeah.
Gary, since Ohio based, I put my email in there as well. Feel free to reach out. Yep. So I'm a couple hours up the road from you, or a few hours up the road from you. So
Okay.
happy to
Okay. A little
stop by,
book
grab a coffee, and we'll figure it out.
Okay.
But yeah, it does.
Awesome. All right.
There is a piece of what we do where we talk about, best practices we've observed and all the work we do to, again, we working across the nation. But that training piece, whether it's leadership development of neighborhood leaders, or that convening piece, right? So having a rhythm of coming together, learning from each other, creating solidarity, that's all important. Those are best practices. So, all right.
All right. And I know James got a question around describing the growth journey of community engagement. Are there cycles of growth, and what are some of the key milestones? I think, James, I see you're still on. If you're good, I think what I would like to do is start the activity, because you guys are going to go into breakout rooms. So that's going to give you guys enough time to talk and to connect. And then Eric and I will put our heads together to really give you a good answer and not spend time just thinking about it in front of you guys. Okay, so
Great
we've
start.
come to the really fun part.
People.
Yes. And look, people stayed on. I don't know many people who stay on when I say you're going to have to interact. So if you didn't jump off yet, you're stuck. I'm kidding. You can jump off. But what we are going to do is dive into that practical framework. And so let me go ahead and pull back up our slides. And so we talked a lot about how do you discover the gifts of your neighborhood. This next 20 minutes is going to be how do you discover an individual's gifts and what they bring to the community. And so what we're going to do is we're going to share with you this model called the gifts of the head, hands, and heart. I will say if there's one tool that I have seen give people the light bulb moment to change from needs and problems and frustrations to gifts, this is that tool, right? You can see it if you're facilitating in a group or one-on-one. And so we're going to jump into this. And what we're going to do is we're going to discover the gifts of the folks in this room. And so we'll start with gifts of the head. I'm going to explain what that is. We're going to go into breakout rooms, and you're going to ask each other that question. We'll probably have about 5 minutes. And when you come back, you're going to share out what is the gift that the others in your room have, right? You'll type that into the chat. All right. So to get us started, gifts up ahead. What is something you know well enough to teach someone else? And so this could be something through education, maybe a professional certification, maybe it's something you just learned through life, right? For a minute, just think about what is one thing you know well enough to teach someone else. All right. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Kelly if you can have people in rooms of 3. We're going to go into those rooms and chat and share this with one another. And the goal is to be very inquisitive, right? If someone says that the thing that they know well enough to teach engineering, there are 80 different types of engineering, right? I have no clue what type of engineer they are. Ask them, right? Be curious, right? That's one of the things that came out is be curious about their gift as much as you can in 5 minutes. All right. Kelly, are we good with those rooms?
Yeah, so let's see. We have, okay, 13. I have to do math. Okay, 13 people. So we'll have, I'm going to do 4. I'll do 4 breakout rooms. I think that should work. Okay. Here we go.
How was y'all's breakout room? Oh, Kelly, I think you're muted.
But hello, there we go. Yeah. It was good. We got so caught up in our conversation. I was like, oh my God, what? I should probably close the rooms. And then I saw your
That's
email.
what happened every time. Awesome. Okay, so we might have one more room coming back. We'll give them a couple seconds. Awesome. Okay. So what I'm going to ask is go ahead, if you want, in the chat, type the gift that you learned, not the gift that you're giving, but what are some of the gifts that were present in that room? And we've got time as well. If instead of typing, if someone also wants to come off mute and just share, we can. You can brag a bit about your group. Right, we've got facilitation skills, Dungeons and Dragons, teaching ABCD, DJing, improv, cooking and cooking philosophy, running, playing soccer and open to coaching, teaching salsa dancing, crocheting, songwriting, community development skills. Awesome. All right. So I don't know that we've got the time to go into the next 2 because I really want to respect the commitment y'all made. But there's always 2 questions that I'll ask as we go through this process. The first is, if instead of asking that question, if I had just given you guys 5 minutes together in a breakout room, do you think you would have found out that information? Some yay, some nay. There's always, I will ask that at like neighborhood workshops. There's always one older woman who I'm like, she would have found out this information. But for the rest of us, no, right? So there's 2 shifts, is right, having this structure, right? And the next one would have been gifts of the hands. What can you make or do? And gifts of the heart. What do you care about enough to act on? And we're going to send out a PDF with all that information. And so typically we wouldn't have discovered it. The other thing, and my favorite way to facilitate this activity is in a group setting. And when you come back to the group, I actually have you brag on the person that you were talking with. Because what happens is what we see is when an individual tells about their gifts, typically it's something like, well, I can be good at crocheting. Like I'm not the best, right? I'm not great at it, but I'm learning. But when their partner brags on them, they're like, this person is the best at crocheting. No one can, right? And you see the difference that happens when people have someone bragging on them. And so that is how we discover individual gifts. It's very simple. I have done this with the different leaders in my neighborhood association. People do this with the neighbors on their block, right? Having one-on-one conversations. And I'll say it's also really helpful because sometimes I assume that people have a specific gift. So I assumed my neighbor with a great garden would have loved gardening. When I asked her, that's not the gift she mentioned. She loves reading to children. She can garden, but that's not what she loves. And so that's the power in the same process that Heights of Hope used is, right? What do you know well enough to teach someone else? What can you make or do with your hands? What do you care about enough to act on? And so I apologize that we didn't have enough time to get that to that whole activity. James, I'll also be reaching out to you. Eric, I didn't know if you had any immediate responses, but I think we could have a much more in-depth conversation about cycles of growth. I know in CommunityWorks, we're looking at for the individuals, right? How are they growing and belonging, but also in connecting with other people. Some of those soft skills and socio-emotional development. We're looking at that organizational infrastructure, right? Are they having the capacity to make decisions, to bring resources into the community that's led by residents? And then we also look at the community, right? So there's a couple different ways you can measure growth. And we also know of other people who measure growth differently. And I'd be happy to share more. So James, we can connect more one-on-one. But thank you all so much for spending 90 minutes of your day. I truly appreciate it and really look forward to connecting with you all in the future. All right. Have a good
Very
one.
quickly,
Happy neighbor.
can I just say very
Thank
quickly,
you so
Megan?
much. Oh,
Yeah.
If the folks in my room or my neighborhood, and I had that information about their gifts and talents, and somebody said, you know what, we should start a neighborhood soccer league to use that, right? I would know where to go to now, right? I would know who has some skills to get us started, at least, if not to help coach and what. So, or hey, the neighborhood, we're going to have this event. I would know who to go to that could do the DJing for us, right? So that's the value too of one, we're engaging people's humanity, and that's just deeply meaningful for a lot of folks because that's especially in today's age. But also we're finding ways to strategically connect people around what they care about enough to act on into a larger story that's going to create greater well-being for everybody. And I think that's the other value here. So finding ways to, whatever space you're in, whether you're working at a neighborhood, whether you work, whatever, this as a way to really move forward and to catalyze that human and social capital and those skills and abilities and passions that people have. So thanks for leading us through that, Megan.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Megan and Eric. That was great.